New Victoria 3 gameplay arrives today, this time playing as Prussia inside of Europe. This is a really fascinating one. A powerhouse striving to be an industrialized nation. Interesting conflicts play out around the world on almost every continent as we look to unify Germany. My name is JumboPixel, and since yesterday's video, we're already inching closer to our subscriber target. Thank you so much to everybody who's joining me. I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth into Victoria 3 when it releases on the 25th of October. In this footage, though, we're playing as Prussia, as you can see. There are time cards and links below to the full gameplay, which was provided, of course, courtesy of the developers over at Paradox Interactive. They do semi-regular streams that give us these insights. I like to take those long-form streams and produce them into more digestible content to highlight the key parts for you and speed through some of the slower paces, if they're not completely cut out. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's begin. And we'll start, as I just mentioned, with German unification. That's the goal here. The developers mentioned jokingly that it would probably be easier if we just played as Danzig here and got it over and done with, but that maybe that wouldn't quite be at the heart of the stream. Instead, we're focusing on this, North German Confederate. We're trying to unite the what are, at this point, really non-unified various German states. You can see them all littered as different colors in between France and Prussia. We also see here, to focus in a little bit more on the gameplay, an interesting UI addition. And while this isn't new, it's important to note that we can track things like interest groups, more on them later, as well as our generals, states within the territory, all of that kind of thing, over on the right-hand side of the screen, making it a little bit easier to monitor as we go through. Speaking of those interest groups, here we can see in this footage as Prussia, we are of course playing as an autocratic nation. It's an absolute monarch at the helm, and at the moment we have our armed forces and our Junkers inside of the government, but there are a whole load of other interest groups in opposition on the right there. Look how powerful the intelligentsia, the industrialists are. There's a load of very equal-footed interests playing out here. The devs then turn to the more internal politics of Prussia. Not just politics, though, of course, economics, really. Sometimes, a lot of the time, the two go hand in hand. And in this case, it's really no different. The first place they turn is to balance the books. Here we're looking at taxation. And they talk about how taxing something like grain or a more universal good, liquor was the first one actually, doesn't quite work for their goals because it targets all portions of the population. What they'd prefer to do is levy taxes on those with more money, so they're not driving those most impoverished further into the ground. To do that, they start to tax more luxury goods, goods you might reach to after your primary needs are met. However, they acknowledge that this is probably going to create some issues, as will a lot of other things that play out in the gameplay. To slightly help with that, they then turn to internal laws. Here's colonization, but more importantly, they're looking at policing and enacting a dedicated police force. You'll notice the approval is fairly good. They also turn here, still within the politics overview, to increase or decrease the sort of spend or power, the level of education, law enforcement, and other institutions that exist within Prussia. At the moment, it's just those two, because that's all that they've unlocked, right? It's very early days, and while we're not a complete backwater, as you can see, we've got a lot of progress to make. Our tax capacity is currently in the red. That will be something they'll look to adjust shortly, and we'll go over that in a little bit more maybe. But they're also looking at the population as a whole and how Prussia stands against the rest of the world. And it seems fairly clear to us that there are some deficiencies to fix. And like in most Paradox grand strategy games, thank you Paradox Interactive, a lot of the key decisions that we make happen before we even hit play, and it's no different here. Fixing deficiencies begins, in this case, with the construction sector. Like in a lot of their other playthroughs, I would note, there is sort of seemingly a formula, or at least maybe 10 boxes, and we should at least check 5 or 6 of them to ensure that we can get our country up and running. Taxation capacity, as we can see here, is a little low, as is infrastructure. In fact, we don't even really have any railways to go on, and trains are going to be a big part of this playthrough as we attempt to unify first, though, the German Confederate, and then full German unification, not just Northern Germany. We'll also turn to our buildings here then. After the construction sectors are online, we'll look to the railway infrastructure, to motor industries, and to those vital base resources you'll see that they're trying to add here. Firstly, by producing them, constructing them, then looking to the Prussian market to try and see what's cheap, maybe what's expensive. They note here that they could produce groceries, which are currently really overpriced in the market, and maybe look to produce them instead of going through this, what I would consider more of a baseline, get your railway, get your motor industries, get your tools, iron, wood, construction sector online. Instead, let's just get groceries and sell them to everybody else and get rich that way. They decide probably not the best move, and will stick with fixing our deficiencies, building up our infrastructure, and the key goods that we need to industrialize the Prussian economy and unify Germany. Maybe peacefully, probably, but also the threat of war will loom, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. So with Prussia's deficiencies starting to be repaired, state bureaucracy improving, authority held, hopefully keeping revolutionaries in check, although, spoiler alert, later in the video, probably not, we now look to play the rest of the world, right? Domestic politics aside, this is a sandbox of epic proportions. So we now need to look to, okay, well, actually, how are we going to unify Germany under this industrialized Prussian rule? And as you can see here, it starts by reaching out to the many small non-unified German states to our left and trying to improve relations with them. We're doing this for two reasons. Two primary reasons anyway. There are many others. We also look to our map to declare interests on any other potential future allies. You'll see some more on that later. The key reasons why we're declaring interests here are to improve relations. In order to build or form, I should say, the East or North German Federation, as it were, we're going to need good relations, or to militarize and take over those states next to us. We're taking the peaceful route this time. The other thing we'll look to do is, of course, build our shared trade, customs, and make use of that infrastructure that we've stacked up to build earlier on. Another part about playing the rest of the world will be to still focus on our internal politics. You'll see some events playing out here, but also some international events. And the Egyptian-Ottoman crisis is one that really captures their interest. Egypt is a potential ally for us in this playthrough, and the gentleman on the right is very keen to see us ally with Egypt for reasons we'll discuss in a little bit. Declaring shared interests in the region will allow us to do that, again, by building that diplomatic bridge if we didn't already have it. Here we're playing off against both internal events and decisions and external ones. Conflict is flaring up in the Middle East, but you can see that we're forming confederations with these Germanic states, starting here with Anhalt and then moving our way through many more. I think you'll see about 5 or 6 play out over the next minute or two of footage that I've spliced together here. We'll also note that, importantly, there are technologies that we need to reach out and grab, not just to industrialize ourselves, but also we're going to need some political ones to boost our authority and keep our growing population under control, especially as we look to unify a whole load of different groups under one sort of northern Germanic banner. We're going to need a more modern city as well, with better tools and infrastructure, and the tech tree will largely help us piece all of this together. There's also, of course, that military element as well. Army defense, in this case, could be especially useful. The developers here talk a little bit about how, playing as Prussia, we're in a difficult situation. We have Austria to our south. They have a better military than us early on, and could look to just sort of militarize over the top of us and unify a Germanic Austrian empire and forget about us Prussians. The other thing to consider is, of course, there is the Russian threat or potential ally to our right. We also have Hungary. And so Austria is deciding, while we're looking through this tech tree, which I thought you might be interested in, so I left a bit extra in, on how it should move. Should it be cool with Hungary, or should it take on all of Germany? While it's deciding that, you'll continue to notice that we have enforced our secret police, check, and continued to bam, 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 bring in all of these states. Look at them, one after another after another. There's our confederation with Saxony, and we are just about ready now to unify to get at least our first journal entry, that sort of guide that helps us play. Of course, there's no strict story here, but we can kind of stick to those historical guidelines using the journal. We'll also continue to monitor our threats or potential allies. We're going to need to buddy up with somebody, at least, if we want to steer clear of having all of the world's major powers dogpile us, or at least our nearby neighbors. Because as I mentioned earlier, while we have a reasonable population and some real potential here as Prussia, particularly in comparison to these smaller Germanic states next to us that we're beginning to improve relations with here, you see more and more we're reaching out into the world. There are strong powers next to us, the Austrian army, the Russian army, two reasonable threats. Another case here to be levied that we should look for an ally in the region. That could very well be the Egypt that we talked about earlier, and as they discuss that, confederations keep coming in. These are of course costing us a little bit of political power. We can only do so many at once. We have limited bureaucracy. But from our buildings that we've been establishing earlier on, through government administration, increased tax collection, we're hopefully not only improving the lives of our people, but also their overall condition and the overall political power of our state through those measures up the top there, including, and most importantly, authority, bureaucracy, these ones that are helping drive our taxes, keep our populations in force. But we do need to make sure that we keep them happy. And this brings us through to a period of massive industrialization. And here, a very quick brainwave is had that Egypt actually has 3 times the naval power that the Austrians have, or that we have. So maybe they could, well, much more than we have. So maybe they could actually be a reasonable strategic interest for us. We could look to declare interest around some of their nearby territories, allies, foes, doesn't really matter, to try and buddy up with them. But the real buddying up here needs to be supported by another push for industrialization. We've had a few years to build up our basic tools, and so now we move through to some more advanced things, right? They're moving through into their second wave of construction, this time looking at things like coal mines, steel mills, all important to push our Prussian railroad from west to east. It will rise. This will help for the mass expansion of really broader infrastructure and trade within the wider region. Moreover, we also see them increase their primary resource extraction as well. Here's looking at you, lumber camps. This will help our trade. This will also help our military. The idea, maybe, it'll also help the populations live a slightly better life as radicalism continues to rise, as we look to finally unify into a unified Northern German Federation. You'll notice a lot of things start to play through now in this gameplay. I haven't even cut anything for about a minute or so. As technology comes through, as construction comes through, they are, of course, playing on 5 speed. You'll notice that their goal is nearly complete as they look back to the journal here. They also briefly have a look in on Egypt, our potential ally not doing so hot. There's a little bit of revolution going on. We won't look too closely at that though, because believe it or not, it's not the strangest conflict that's about to take place in the world. Speaking of the world, a new player arises, finally. As they reach to pause the game, we'll see Prussia and its many sort of Germanic states around it now form the North German Federation. That's right, towards Germany. This is the first big milestone of the stream. Not quite halfway in, but comfortably a third of the way into the gameplay section anyway. We see them unify Germany. And with that, their nation changes. You'll notice the flag up in the top left has changed, and no longer are we playing as Prussia, but now the North German Empire, or Federation. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. As we look across the world just briefly, we see Texas fighting with the US, fighting with the Mexicans. There's some conflict going on around there. More on that in a little bit. With our unified state in mind, the North German Federation, we now potentially set our eyes a little further afield. Although probably not on this northern play over in China. We'll see some interesting things play out here too in a minute, as the beautiful Northern German Federation with its new flag, its new color, and its new borders is now unified finally on our map. Now as a stronger power in the global setting, we have extra people, extra GDP, we have more subjects to look at. We can decide how we want to treat them, if we want to liberate or transfer, and look to now not just get northern Germany in a federation, but actually unify the whole dang lot. I think this is really, or at least the key takeaway from me and from what a lot of people were talking about in chat, if they weren't saying, please show us the trains on the map, they were saying that this is a really interesting playthrough because it shows us that playing as a relatively minor nation, or at least a nation that starts on the back foot in comparison to their very near and close neighbors, is absolutely something doable, potentially more doable than it may have been in Victoria 2, whether that's due to the AI or the UI, the user interface, the overall experience of Victoria 3, or if it was just this particular playthrough, is of course yet to be seen. Here we see them reach out a little further though, coming from a minor nation now, rising up the ranks of political and economic, and of course, hopefully military power at some point. They start to engage with other nations. The French market is one example. I thought I'd include it here as I talk over this talking point about how they can start to reach out to get access to better goods, more luxury items potentially, to improve the livelihood of their people. Unlike perhaps what's going on here as the world burns. Take a look. As we look around the map in Victoria 3, we can see a conflict over here between the United States of America and Mexico. This one is particularly fascinating. I thought a lot of you might also find it interesting. We also have the Heavenly Kingdom over here as they swoon over a very sweet-looking ruler. Either way, you can see the fractions or factions start to play out. There's American Alberta, the state of Montana there they're zooming in on, a very young President Abraham Lincoln too. So it goes to show, I think, a few different things, that large empires will fracture, fall, fragment, but also that smaller ones can rise up. This, of course, doesn't happen without issues, and it's not just the rest of the world, whether it's the Egyptian Ottoman Empire or what's going on in the Americas that's fracturing, but potentially us here as well. The North German Federation is at risk of revolution, just like what was playing out previously with the Egyptians. Although you can see here that their foe, the Ottomans, maybe it didn't work out so bad for our friends over in Egypt. It's the Ottomans that have started to suffer. However, with the sparks of revolution starting to play out, and the Northern Germanic sort of federation looking to unify not just themselves, but the rest of that wonderful little German empire, the devs are now faced with a key issue. How do they continue to industrialize while also sniffing out this radicalism? This will prove difficult for them to keep their government stable, to enforce their taxes, and maybe they'll also remember to slide things across to the left so that we can see all of the tooltips. That's all for this part 1. Join me very soon for part 2, where I'll cover off the rest of the rise of the Germanic Empire and the conflicts and turbulent times that go along with it. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you as soon as I can, possibly with the next part.